I would start with the profile of Mrs. Victoria Anyanuka. She's the Corporate Communications, Public Affairs, and Sustainability Lead in Nigeria, where she operates at the forefront of policy, advocacy, legislative risk management, and corporate reputation stewardship. She is a senior communication affairs professional with over 2 decades across the FMCG, technology, and professional services sectors. Her career spans leading multinational organizations, including Microsoft Nigeria and Microsoft West and Central Africa, where she provided strategic leadership, communications, and public affairs initiatives. Victoria also serves as the chair of the NECA Technical Committee on Corporate Communications and Public Affairs. So please welcome me, Mrs. Victoria Ayanka. We can react with our applause. Thank you. The next is Dr. Olumuyiwa Adebayo. Is a luminary in the finance sector and wields a remarkable array of expertise spanning financial reporting, risk management, taxation, and adherence to international financial norms. His academic portfolio boasts a diverse education from a higher national diploma in business administration and management at Yaba College of Technology to a bachelor's degree in actuarial science with honors from the University of Lagos, complemented by an MBA from the University of Cumbria, UK, further enriching his knowledge base, a postgraduate advanced diploma in transfer pricing from Middlesex University, UK, and the postgraduate programs in data science and business analytics, and artificial intelligence and machine deep learning, both from the University of Texas at Austin, and a certificate course on blockchain technology from University of Cape Town, South Africa. Adebayo's professional standing is augmented by international recognized certifications such as the CFA Charter and the Financial Risk Manager Accreditation from GARP USA. His stature is further elevated by fellowships in prestigious Nigerian institutes including ICANN, CITN, and the Institute of Credit Administration, alongside professional accountancy designations of CGMA and ACMA from the AICPA and CIMA, respectively. His expertise is globally acknowledged, evidenced by a diploma in international financial reporting from ACCA UK and an advanced diploma in management accounting from CIMA UK. He is also distinguished by the Fellowship of the Institute of Management Consultants, FIMC, and holds a Certified Management Consultant title. Olumuyiwa holds a doctorate degree in finance. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Olumuyiwa Adebayo. Next, I would go to the profile of Dr. Eno Udoma Enyang. She's a dual qualified lawyer, entrepreneur, and seasoned corporate affairs professional with over 30 years of experience across legal practice, corporate governance, regulatory affairs, stakeholder engagement, and business leadership. She's the founder and managing director of MBRE Travel and Tours. Previously, Dr. Udoma Enyang served as director, corporate affairs at Promasidon Nigeria Limited, where she led corporate communications, government relations, and sustainability engagement. Before Promasidon, she held senior leadership roles at Emerging Markets Telecommunications Service Limited, Nine Mobile, including head of government and legislative affairs, and has worked in leading law firms and corporate legal roles within the banking and telecommunications in Nigeria and Ghana. She holds a BL from the Nigerian Law School and Ghana School of Law, an MBA in Consultancy Management from the University of Wales, Cardiff, and an Executive MBA and DBA from IMAS Business School in Russia. A round of applause for Dr. Eno. Then finally, I'll be reading the profile of Mr. Ifeanyi E. Okonkwo. He's a partner at the Pan-African law firm, Stillwaters Law Firm. He graduated as the best of his set in his master's studies in intellectual property and technology at the University of Cape Town. Before obtaining his master's degree, Ifeanyi simultaneously earned 2 degrees from Nnamdi Azikiwe University in Law and Philosophy, where he graduated at the top of his class. He attended the Nigerian Law School Lagos campus, from where he obtained his license to practice law. As a practitioner, Ifeanyi is a globally acclaimed expert in intellectual property law and data privacy law. In terms of data privacy practices, he has conducted over 80 audits and trained more than 40 companies. He has also co-authored a chapter in the MV Data Privacy book by Lexology and written several articles on data privacy. Ifeanyi has spoken at the Global IAPP Conference on Data Privacy. He has also reviewed and advised international and regional companies on their data privacy agreements, documentation, and regulatory compliance. He is a fellow at the prestigious Institute of Information Management, the formal body for the certification of data privacy officers. He is also a member of the advisory board of the Data Practitioners Lawyers Association of Nigeria. On intellectual property, he is one of the global intellectual property leaders recognized by the World Intellectual Property Review and the first Nigerian IP expert recognized in the NVID AMA 300 Global IP Strategy. Is a proud recipient of an honorary doctorate from Crown University. He has handled several complex IP transactions and dispute resolutions. He's also the IP faculty at the prestigious Tekedia Institute, where he lectures on practical intellectual property for businesses. He's passionate about the development of businesses in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Ifeanyi E. Okonkwo. All right. Thank you. So to formally set the tone for today's session, it is my honor to invite the Director General of NECA, Mr. Adewale Smart Oyemide, to deliver the opening remarks. Digi, sir, you have the floor.
Good morning, colleagues. Can you hear me, Tommy?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to have you on the call. And first, want to say Happy New Year to all of us. Wishing us peaceful and very prosperous year. So somebody might ask, why are we starting with the conversation about managing regulatory compliance? It's because we realize that fundamentally this year, and in view of the many reforms that the government started about 2 years ago, there's going to be a lot of pressure on member companies. The pressure started last year, and we realized that one of the key issues that will dominate the business space is the issues concerning regulators and concerning the demands by regulators. Enforcement will be high, and there's need for businesses to prepare themselves in such a way that they don't fall victim of infractions, as we call it. In this environment, regulators, what we have seen is they don't wait to correct action. Most times they wait at the corner like a policeman waiting to catch a thief. And once there are infractions, they pounce. And once they pounce, it becomes an issue of you pay the fine, you pay the penalty, which ordinarily should not be. So I would feel for businesses that are already struggling, with so many issues, they should not be burdened over again with the context of these regulatory infractions. Some businesses, by reason of ignorance, they fall short of the basic compliance levels. For some, for different reasons, they don't really get into it. But the focus for us is, let's prepare our member companies, prepare businesses and organizations to be prepared for the regulatory and legislative issues that will dominate 2026. First, because 2026, 2027 is an election year, and regulators and legislators also, directly or indirectly, will step up activities to mop up funds. And the biggest group that they can engage or they can lay siege on is the organized private sector, because we are the only one that's seemingly organized. So not to fall victim of these infractions, and not to fall victim of these issues, we feel it's very important for us to engage with you, so that we also, as we are preparing to engage on your behalf, all these regulators and legislators, you're also prepared to tidy up your own end. In 2025 and beyond, critical regulators that we engaged were, Tommy, am I sharing?
Yes.
Yeah, some of the critical regulators that we engaged, and rightly so, were the National Health Insurance Authority. As you're probably aware now, the act, the NHI Act, is out. Implementation has to a large extent commenced, and the act basically says that, look, health insurance is now compulsory for everybody. So all employers, it's very important. All employers, irrespective of your size, you must register your employees in the NHIA. It is very compulsory now. It's now a universal coverage issue. So there's no more excuse of I didn't put my employees on the health insurance scheme. It is now compulsory for all of us, all employees, to be covered in the health scheme. Now, there are some states like Lagos. You probably have heard of Ilere-Eko in Lagos, something from other states coming up. The law empowers the National Health Insurance Authority to regulate, and it gives the customers, that is businesses, it gives them the prerogative to choose any platform they want. Whether any of the HMOs you want to use, you are free. And if it's Ilere-Eko you want to use, you are also free to use Ilere-Eko. No provider is compulsory. Well, the most compulsory part is you must register your staff in anyone. We're all aware of the rebirth FRS and the issues concerning the new tax reform act. We don't have an excuse now. It's now operational since first of January. And it's our responsibility as businesses, so that we don't fall short of these issues, to start and continue to ask questions. The implementation committee for the tax reform has been inaugurated. So they've moved away from, it's no more the Presidential Committee on Tax and Fiscal Reforms now. There's an implementation committee that will guide the implementation. And we also have our representatives in that committee. So we're also open to engage and continuously share. Towards the end of this program, one of my colleagues will share an email with you. An email where, if you have any issue, and that's the direction we want to approach these issues of regulators and legislators in 2026. If you have any issue, any challenge, any clarification concerning the activities of any regulator, please just drop those issues, those challenges, drop them in that email, and be rest assured that we will escalate appropriately. Nestra also came up last year, and they started issuing bills, 500 million, 1 billion naira penalty to organized businesses, and we also had to intervene. You all know NSITF, you all know ITF, Financial Reporting Council, and the battle we fought also to make sure that the levy is not exploitative to your businesses. And now, and there are over 100 other regulators, over 100 others across sectors, across industries. And circumstantially, depending on where you are operating from, you are obliged to engage some of these regulators in different formats, in different levels. And now we talk about the legislators themselves. We had different committees, ad hoc committees of the houses, both at the federal and the state level, and the Senate itself. So it's going to be a very interesting 2026 in the context of engagement with regulators. The best I can say on behalf of the Secretariat is that we are always available to continue to engage on your behalf, so that no member will fall victim of any exploitative activity of any regulator, as it were. And the faculties or resource that we have pulled together from their profile, you can see that they're all up to date within the context of their engagement, from the issue of tax to the issue of legislative engagement. They are all up there. But be rest assured, we'll continue to backstop you. But it's very important that all member companies also keep their house in order, so that we don't embarrass ourselves when we approach a regulator to say we are here on behalf of our member companies, and they show us the level of infraction that member company is already falling for. So I want to appeal and also encourage us that let's take note as much as possible. Let's ask questions as much as possible. Because of the time constraint, we're not able to take all the questions or answer all the queries, but we'll provide that email where all issues you can be rest assured that we'll continue to address all those issues. It's going to be a very interesting year, 2026, within the context of regulation and legislative activities. We're already on some currently. The NSITF Act, we're on top of it, engaging. The National Revenue Service, we're also currently still engaging. The FRS, FRC, NESRA, we are currently still engaging them from our engagement in 2025. But we just need all member companies to also be abreast of these issues. It's no more a passive. We should not take it as a passive activity. It's engagement with regulators is now at the heart of your business sustainability, because they can either mar or they can make your business. And that is the perspective that we want all of us to take this session that will continue in a few minutes. So I'm going to go back to Tomi. I said, Okpa will share the email address that we created for the tax reforms committee, so that we can share with members, and then we can follow up from there moving forward. So thank you once again for joining us, and I also look forward to a very engaging and definitive session. Back to you, Tomi.
All right, thank you, Gigi. Thank you for clearly setting the context for today's discussion. We'll now proceed to the technical session, and our first presentation will be delivered by Mrs. Victoria Ayanuka. She's the chair of the NECA Technical Committee on Corporate Affairs, on Corporate Communications and Public Affairs, and also the Corporate Communications, Public Affairs, and Sustainability Lead at Nestle Nigeria. You're welcome. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And a very happy new year, everyone. Just give me a moment while I silence this noise. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think Mr. DG has really set the tone. And I just want to walk through a couple of things with us. Tomi, can I share? Is it possible to share? If not, that's okay.
Yes.
I'll just
You can share.
I can share.
You can
Okay,
share.
awesome.
Yes.
Let me do that, because it will help me to I'll share the screen and go to the presentation. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, awesome. Okay, so we're just going to look at a couple of things when it comes to legislation. I won't go into the list of all the legislation that we have right now and all the regulatory challenges that we have right now, because I think we all know our operating environment. But, really, the important thing is, how can we be proactive about it instead of being reactive, waiting for the hammer to fall on us before we take the necessary action? That's what we're going to look at today, because what we're discussing is the risks and the opportunities, right? So yes, we have the multi-agency oversight. Yes, we have high regulatory exposure, and organizations are almost, spending 30% of their time really on these regulatory issues? Is there an opportunity to, automate it? Is there an opportunity to digitalize it? Is there an opportunity to be more proactive about it so that we can plan even in the midst of the uncertainty? Yes, of course they are. We're seeing ongoing reforms, and it's great. The tax reforms, Mr. DG has spoken to that. Do we understand what it means? Do we understand the implication for our company? Are we ready? Are we ensuring that? Are we taking it on proactively? Look at the changes that are happening with marketing, advertising regulations, and management. Are we being proactive about them? So really, for most of the implications, the ball is in our court to take the opportunities that exist within that. Of course, there's the backward integration demands as well. So we have quite a lot to deal with. And if we're not owning it, if we're not managing it, like really proper management, then we're bound to have challenges as we go along in the year. So yes, the administrative costs that we've seen from all overlapping agencies can be quite a problem. But yes, it contributes to the higher cost of doing business. Which we translate into the cost of the product on the market. And like we all know, the consumers are stretched to the maximum, so we don't have an opportunity to even increase the prices in line with the increasing cost of doing business. So can we optimize? That is also the ball that is within our court to optimize our operations. Are there ways that we can manage it? Are there ways that we can understand what these agencies need and then, work with them to ensure that we are being quite proactive? That helps us to plan as well. Of course, there's the uncertainty. I won't speak about that anymore. Okay, so what are the challenges of non-compliance? And Mr. DG spoke about that briefly. I want to focus on it. Non-compliance actually is of a higher risk to your organizations. There is not only the challenge or the risk of disruption of your operations, but it can do great damage to your reputation. And as you know, a reputation takes quite a long time to build, but it can be destroyed in a moment. It will be one enforcement by FCCPC. It will be one enforcement. It will be one consumer complaint. It will be one, even accusation of unfair practices, and then you have a challenge on your hands. So tax and fiscal compliance is really important because non-compliance can erode your margins. I mean, imagine if you have what they call them, if they are the charges imposed on you because of non-compliance, what are you going to do about that? That is an increased cost, and you are still really going to pay the tax before you pay the penalties. Those things can really, really, do a lot of damage to your bottom line. It can do a lot of damage to the plan that you've so carefully put together. Now, we talked about the strategic and reputational risks. Regulatory breaches, they can damage brand equity and investor confidence. Nobody wants to know that your factory was locked up or your operational headquarters was locked up because of an issue of non-compliance. So it is very important that you're really ensuring that you're being compliant. Mr. DG spoke about the fact that as an alliance, as a group, we work together, we drive policy together. Our business is to protect our businesses. That is what we're doing really at NECA. But if we are not doing our own part, if we're not playing our own part, then it becomes embarrassing. When you get to the regulator and you say, I'm coming for this person, you want to know that that person is also doing the right thing. So when the facts are presented, then you don't have anything to be worried about. We've had some meetings with PEBEC, and we're very happy to say, look, these are our facts, these are our figures, because our members are doing what they're supposed to do, but this is what we need done now. So that is very important. Non-compliance can remove that opportunity, can remove that power from us to be able to proactively engage with regulators and engage with them with our full chest, as we say in Nigeria. Non-compliance can also damage consumer trust. There are lots of issues going on. Of course, there's misinformation. There are all kinds of things going on. But if you, as a regulator, as an organization, are not being compliant, and compliance is not only with taxes, it's not only with regulatory requirements, it's also being compliant with your commitment to your consumers. You say you're going to deliver quality products, you deliver that. Quality services, you deliver that. Because non-compliance can actually really impact, the trust that the consumer has in you. It can impact the trust that the customers have in you. It erodes that trust, and it takes a lot of time to build up. And of course, because today consumers are more aware, their expectations for product safety, for product quality, for transparent marketing practices, all of that is at a very, very high level. And your compliance level must be high enough to meet that high demand by the consumers. Now, if we look at, what we need to do, it is time to move away from being reactive when it comes to compliance to being strategic when it comes to compliance. That way, it gives you the advantage and you can gain more from being compliant than just, oh, you know what, I'm responding to the regulator who is at my door, knocking at my door for one thing or the other. Now, how can we do that? What are some best practices that we've seen? And I'm going to just call this up. First of all, leadership must come from the top. So that leadership must come from the board, from the CEO to set the tone for compliance, building really a culture of compliance. You have to champion corporate governance and compliance integration as a business advantage. That is what being strategic about your compliance means. You must treat compliance as a value creation opportunity, not just as a cost. Because, think about compliance. And when you have, really put in place a system that carries out proactive audits, so you catch the problem or you are aware of the problem and you work on a plan to manage that and turn it into an advantage for you, whether it is from sourcing to production to distribution to consumer engagement to community engagement to stakeholder engagement. That is really super important. So you must embed compliance into your enterprise risk management framework. I'm sure that is already done. You build a culture of compliance that comes from the top down and comes from the bottom up. Everybody needs to understand that compliance is a non-negotiable and that compliance can actually be an advantage. So you are at peace to plan your business, to plan your business growth, to position for new frontiers that you want to take, instead of just being reactive and running after the agencies and regulators to close a challenge when it has already become a problem. Now, the next thing that you must do is to ensure internal readiness. So everybody has a part to play when it comes to compliance, from regulatory affairs to legal to procurement to marketing to sales to communication. Everybody is a part of it. So you must ensure that you've already aligned on how to ensure that your people are trained and they're ready. Now, when new legislations, when new reforms come into place, for example, the tax reform, how are you managing the onboarding of every member of your team to understand what the implications are? What are the new regulations that are out there? The NHIS, the regulations, all the requirements that come with the new tax law, all the requirements that come with the new frameworks and the new policies. Does everybody that has a part to play in it know exactly what the implication is and how your company sits within that? Do they know what to do? Do they know how to prepare for it? Do they know how to ensure that we are all being compliant? That is something that is in our part. It's on our part. It's in our hands. We can do it. We can make sure that every member of our team is ready, understands what needs to be done, and that they have the tools to do what needs to be done. And that brings me to the second point. There is so much to do. And when you're doing all of that manually, that can be a challenge. So it's time that we started to invest in digital infrastructure that helps us to ensure compliance. So everybody's feeding into one system. The reports are easier to pull. You can, you can audit. Your internal audits can go much smoother, much faster, because everybody is feeding on the same system. So invest in those digital platforms, digital technology apps that can help you ensure compliance without, removing all the risks of traceability and all of that. When you have so many different engines or different parts moving in different ways, you can bring it all together on a digital platform that ensures that your compliance is, digitized basically. And now we see with the new tax reforms and all of that, and FRC, no, FIRS, requiring more digitization of the systems. So it is coming, even from the regulators. So we need to be ready on our part to be able to plug into that digital system as it becomes available. Now, the last thing on this slide that I want to talk about is engaging stakeholders proactively. So there's a new tax law. There is a new regulation. There's a new policy. Have you engaged the creators of the policy, the owners of the policy, the implementers of the policy? Do you understand every part of it and what impact that that has on your business. And when you've done that and you've discovered that, okay, look, it has this impact, it will have XYZ impact. It's gonna impact us negatively in this way or that way. Who are the other stakeholders that I need to talk to? Who are the people that I need to work with to work around this if I can't make it go away? And who do I need to engage to push back on this if I wasn't even consulted in the drafting of this policy and it's going to be a challenge? So proactive planning, and this is a good moment as we're talking about a new year. If you do not have that proactive stakeholder engagement plan, that map that shows you everybody who can negatively or positively impact your business and negatively and positively impact your ability to comply, this is the time to work on that. So proactive stakeholder engagement. Of course, we have the overlaps and all of that. Do you understand where those overlapping mandates are? Do you understand why there are the overlaps? Do you understand the mandate of each of the agencies that we have to deal with? And do you understand what you need to do about it? Are you positively or proactively engaging with us at NECA, or engaging with the NECA Secretariat to ensure that your needs and your challenges are being addressed, are there on the table, and we know that that is something that we must put in our advocacy documents to ensure that we are helping you to be compliant and to do what you need to do. These are the things that are very important that we can do on our own to ensure that we are complying strategically and not reactively, because reactively will always be more challenging. It will always be more problematic. It will not deliver as much advantage as knowing what you need to do to comply and being strategic about it so that you're able to work around any challenges or bottlenecks that come with that. Okay. And then now, as a market, as Nigeria, as a country, how can we turn compliance into market strength? And with the AFCFTA down here, we need to be more competitive. And that means that our cost of doing business has to be more competitive as well. Because the market is open. Everybody is here and is geared and is ready and is willing to compete. Are you ensuring that you're competitive as a whole industry or as a country? Of course, we can enhance that by ensuring that there is more fiscal transparency. And I think that we have a good example from the recent tax reforms, and all that we're doing going forward with that. So that is a good example that we can take forward into all other policies as we work towards creating them. We must ensure more transparency. We must ensure more engagement. So we're building together and we understand why it's important for us and what differences and changes that can make. This is even super important because I was speaking to a number of people about the tax reforms. Even those that would have an advantage from the tax reforms thought that it was going to be a problem, thought that there would be more disadvantaged and they were going to pay more taxes. So the importance of continuous communication, engaging at all levels, is not something that we can overemphasize. So we must ensure more transparency when it comes to policies, reforms, regulations, and all of that. We must understand why it's important and what advantages or what disadvantages that can bring, and how can we work around it to ensure a win-win for everybody. Of course, a unified tax system is a go, 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 go. And that's why, I'm really super excited that this is happening now. Yes, maybe there are a few things that we need to tweak here and there, but we're off to a good start and we can ensure that that works because it is the best thing that we can do for ourselves as industry and as a country to ensure that these tax reforms succeed and succeed in the long term so that we can build around that to plan our business for the next 5 to 10 years. Now we talked about the digital compliance platforms as governments, as systems, as alliance. Hello, sorry, I got cut off. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
awesome. Thank you. So I'm just going to try and share again so that we can finish that. I'll just share the document itself. Right. I think starting all over again. Sorry about that. I think I was here. It's not allowing me to put it on that mode. Please give me a moment. Technology is great when it works. I'll try that again. Okay, I think I can do this. Can you see my screen, please?
I can see a screen, but not the slides yet.
All right, okay. I will make it work. Can you see the slide now?
Yes, yes, you can see this.
Awesome. Okay. I think I was here. So we're talking about the digital compliance. I think that's where it was. And of course, we must ensure that we are making decisions based on data, not just because we feel that, oh, this is going to be a great decision. Every country around us is doing that. America is doing that. Singapore is doing that. It must be data driven. It must be market relevant. It must be what works for us, and it must be based on the data that we have. It must be based on our realities. Of course, integrated tax, regulatory data, they will support strategic planning. And so that's an added advantage. So that's something that we can do, and a push for that to be done even at a greater level. You know, the relationship that we have with PEPEC, with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, with all the various stakeholders, that is why that is important. So we can drive to ensure that decisions, policies, legislations are data driven. Very, very important for us. And of course, we must be export ready. We must be ready for the AFCFTA. We must ensure that we're competitive. We must be ready to take the market and to take advantage of the huge market that Africa presents. When we streamline our tax and compliance systems, we will lower the barriers to cross-border trade. And I think that that's why the work that is being done by customs to synchronize the codes across the zone is very important. But we must be sure that our needs are being met as Nigeria, that our realities are being taken into consideration to ensure that we're not disadvantaged at the end of the day. So these are things that are super important to ensure that we can be a strong market, a competitive market, and a compliant market as an industry. So that I want to say thank you, and I look forward to the engagement in the Q&A session. Thank you very much. I hand the mic back to you, Tami.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Anyanaka, for that clear exposition on the benefits of compliance and the importance of proactive compliance. So if you have questions for Madam Victoria, you can leave it at the chat box during the Q&A session. We are going to take it. Thank you very much once again. So next we'll be having Dr. Olumuyiwa Adebayo, who is the Group Head of Tax and Financial Controls at Sarah Group, and is also the chairperson of the Committee of Finance and Tax Experts for NECA. Dr. Adebayo, you have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity once again. Happy New Year to everyone. I believe you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, as we are more or less navigating this discussion, managing regulatory and legislative risk and compliance, the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities, what I have decided to do was to more or less develop this presentation dashboard, which is more or less iterative and more or less illustrative. Now, this will allow me to more or less have a talk through. It's more or less going to be a talk through what we know already, but just to reawaken our consciousness. And therefore, I'll make it more interactive in such a way that it's just to speak to our inner mind, to see things beyond just compliance, beyond just regulation, but rather something that should be systemic, something that should be imbibed by our cultural practices in order to ensure that we don't only stay compliant, but we are competitive and we have that edge in order to guarantee our sustainability as a business, most especially in this part of the world where we have a lot of bottlenecks and red tapes that more or less are counterproductive. And in this way, we'll be able to achieve better results for our various organizations. Now, let me more or less create a poll here. Now, I'll simply ask us, okay, which areas from the little one I've identified here creates the biggest compliance stress in our organization today? Are we going to look at it from the angle of the most recent development with respect to tax reforms? Okay, which means what are our deadlines? Are we just looking at the tax calendar for the purpose of filing VAT, withholding tax, company income tax, and the likes? Or the aspect of governance and control? Okay, we are familiar with, for the PIEs, public interest entities, we are familiar with the recent developments of ensuring that you stay compliant with respect to internal control over financial reporting. Okay, are you looking at that, or what is that a critical area that bother you much more today? Or is the area of financial reporting judgments where now you need to be much more circumspect about your various bases of judgment estimation that lies with your valuation and some other things like that? Okay, or all of the above? Okay, but again, if I'm to speak from my own perspective, I can tell you that virtually all of these things are critical to ensuring compliance within our organization and also ensuring our competitiveness and to guarantee our sustainability in the long run. Now, looking at that, I then try to look at it from this angle for us to understand that compliance goes beyond just what you are forced to do or what you do by just way of checklist. And I'll put it like this. When you look at regulatory risk, okay, is it just about the law? Or rather, is it about our behavior? Now, when you look at it from this perspective, the behavior of people, our systems, and our incentives, can we look at it from that bigger picture rather than just what the law says, or what our regulator says, or what the regulation itself says? Now, 2026 and beyond, what we should more or less ask as questions goes beyond issue of have we filed, but rather move towards how do we tend to more or less in a pragmatic manner, not only stay compliant, but by design, which means it's something that is embedded in our cultural practices. And therefore, I expect that today, in order to evade any regulatory sanctions, penalty, interest, and the like, therefore, we need to stay connected with these three dots. The first one is issue of the fact that the current administration and government needed revenue to actualize the social contracts with the people. Therefore, and if care is not taken, apart from you being forced to pay your appropriate tax, but due to non-compliance, you might end up paying interest on a compounded basis and paying penalty, which then means that we need to more or less embrace tax discipline. The other aspect, most especially for the public interest entity, borders on governance. The question then is, your governance structure matter. And in order to ensure that it's not just by regulation, but by the spirit of the intent of that regulation, you ensure that your governance structure ensures and guarantees control discipline. And likewise, remember that we all have stewardship reporting or accountability to our various stakeholders. Therefore, we must also ensure reporting credibility, because both our business environment, which encompasses our stakeholders and our regulators, will judge us on these three. And that's why I will encourage us much more to do the needful. Now, with the latest developments, both at tax level, at other level within the regulatory space, there are some things that we need to be very wary of that protects red flags in 2026. The DG of NECA has more or less given us tips of what we may likely expect. And therefore, we need to be much more proactive rather than reactive in dealing with this such that we are not caught in the web. And therefore, let us look at this. First, we have multiple calendars that most of us within the finance space are going to be combating with. We have calendar that borders on our fiscal regimes and taxes. We have calendar that borders on our reporting and finances dealings with the likes of FRC and our primary regulators. And likewise, some that borders on legal requirements, including filing with CACs and the likes. The question then is, multiple calendars with no single owners is a flag, which means ownership with respect to responsibility is critical. Now, over time, most of us have not digitized or automated our system for compliance. And therefore, some of us relies on manual spreadsheets to drive statutory obligations, which does not give trail, or what I would call audit trail or control trail. And therefore, that becomes a flag that due to error within our spreadsheets for capturing our reporting obligations or our regulatory obligations might portend risk to us. Now, how do we handle transaction taxes today in the new space of the Nigerian Tax Act 2025? If we are familiar with the Act and provision, we'll see that the penalty regime is highly punitive, which then means that gone are those days that we can more or less condone our laxity in ensuring compliance with respect to transaction taxes. But in this era, for example, for a company that deals with a vendor that fails to register for tax, and you dealt with such vendor without validating that they are more or less within the net of FRS, which is now NRS, the question then is that there's now a fine of 5 million for you dealing with an entity or an enterprise that is not registered for tax purposes. Likewise, there's further penalty that says that by the time you are supposed to deduct withholding tax of 5%, 10%, or otherwise, naturally in a transaction, but because the entity is not registered for tax, or as a foreign entity that you deal with, and you did not have it registered for tax, you pay double of the withholding tax rate. We then speak to the fact that these are the little things that could eat into the value that ought to be created for these larger stakeholders. Issue of weak evidence that borders on documentation, approval processes, reconciliation, supporting schedules, and the likes. In today's world, that also is critical because, for example, within the new tax laws, it is so critical and so clear that documentation will much more be the bedrock of proving your tax position. Otherwise, even when you are more or less right, or you've done the right thing, but you cannot prove by effective documentation, which is considered valid documentation, therefore, you might more or less be caught in the web. And finally, also, for us that are finance professionals, we are responsible to ensuring the financial reporting of our organizations. And in financial reporting, what goes much more into our financial statement are things that borders on judgments that we have made, estimations that we have made, and also valuations that are much more critical to most of the estimation we've made in line with international financial reporting standard. And the question then is, what are the evidence and what are the data-driven support documents we have to justify those bases of assumptions, estimates, and valuation we have made, so that at no point in time do we create that gap that will expose us to regulatory sanction. And that's why you find out that today, Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria, more or less by their rules, mandates companies to more or less carry out assessment and attestation by even the auditors over internal reporting on financial, internal control on financial reporting and the likes. Now, the question you ask yourself is simply, which of these red flags is costing us the most hidden time and possibly reputational risk? But there are a lot of those things that we could see in the course of that. Now, I'll come back to some of those salient questions that I've more or less come across over time and that I'll speak to before I wrap up. And they border on risk governance, tax discipline, and reporting and control. But let me simply go into what I wanted to talk furthermore on. Now, what are the issues that are at stake as of the moment? Now, it's no longer ideals, but only that what is new is that government currently is making proactive steps in order to address some of those issues, especially about regulatory overloads, multiplicity in regulations, overlapping, and also we need to move away from just the archaic form of regulation to more or less risk-based regulation. Now, what are the issues we contend with? The first one borders on regulatory overload and fast-changing rules. Now, we face a lot of overlapping regulations, and sometimes you'll find out that there's policy somersaults. Sometimes there are updates that are not widely circulated, that if you don't keep yourself abreast, and if you don't follow organizations like NECA, you might find it difficult to catch up with most of these things. And therefore, this is creating a lot of operational challenges and compliance issues. And one thing that I've encouraged organizations to do, which organizations are now doing much more now, is that organizations then need to have a functional unit, if not a department, to be responsible for managing regulations and other related activities. All because, though it doesn't create value by way of monetary quantification, but again, it's something that once you miss it, it could destroy value. And therefore, that ownership have to be created within that space. Another one is misalignment between law and our operational reality. Now, sometimes in the course of developing regulations or laws by the appropriate government agencies or authorities, wider consultations are not taken into consideration, and operationality of it sometimes becomes challenging. And therefore, non-compliance often happens where process design is inconsistent with the legal intent. And therefore, in today's world, we need to redesign our process, not just by way of checklist, but something that speaks volume to ensure that compliance is always integral of what we do, so that we see it as much more something that preserves our value rather than something that we are doing just because a regulator or the law requires us to do. The other issue borders on data quality, documentation, and audit readiness. Now, remember, so far we are under regulation. There's always what we call a post-mortem assessment, which regulators, whether FRS, FRC, CAC, whatever regulator that we are subject of, will come at a point in time based on the requirement of the law to carry out audit, to carry out assessment, sometimes to even request for additional information. And therefore, it is critical that every dealings of ours are well documented and we can provide effective support evidence to support our position in order to avert unnecessary sanctions and the likes. Therefore, we need to adopt evidence first and ensure that we have a system, maybe technological driven, that help us to warehouse most of our information so that at every point in time, we can use it to defend ourselves at every point in time, even in the court of law. Also, we have issues that border on tax leakages. And later on, I'm going to show you some scenarios which are more or less common to most organizations in Nigeria that could likely create what we call tax leak. And these are much more as a result of transaction taxes, withholding tax, value-added tax, and some other things like that. And therefore, it's critical for us to ensure that we avoid issue of late remittances and the likes. And that's why sometimes we encourage companies to have internal compliance calendar, reporting calendar, so that at every point in time, there is a trigger before the due date. And if you check the budget of federal government, you will also see that part of the line of income, which is categorized as other income, some of them also involve RAM, penalty, interest, and the like. And therefore, we should more or less avoid such as far as practicable. Lastly, within the issues, borders on our reporting. And therefore, the reporting integrity is critical. And that's why we are familiar with the development now, majorly for public interest entities, where we now have rules that requires us to comply with the attestation on internal control over financial reporting, with valuation standards, with governance requirement and assessment as far as practicable. Now, let's now look, apart from the issues, what are the challenges that we equally face within our organizations? Now, first, sometimes we work in silos, okay? Finance work in silos, legal work in silos, operation people work in silos, commercial, and the like. And therefore, this fragmented ownership creates loopholes and gaps as far as possible. And therefore, even though our responsibility have to be defined, but there is a room where we have to work interdependently in order not to allow any stone left unturned. And therefore, it's critical that collectively we more or less have handshake in order to ensure that at every point in time, we are not creating gaps. Another issue we have is that some of our compliance activities are manualized, and therefore manual process vis-a-vis the weak controls we have. Therefore, in today's world, apart from building a robust control, one of those things that can guarantee adherence to those controls and measures is to find a way to digitize through cloud technologies, simple technologies, easy to access technologies as far as possible. If not, even we automate our processes. Because one thing is to digitize, Another thing is to scale it up by automating so that machines more or less do more of those work that individuals are meant to do, because machine doesn't have emotion. Machine doesn't get tired. Machine is not carried away most of the time. Therefore, they can do most of those jobs for us, and so that at every point in time we get alert, we get notification, there are triggers and some other things in order to ensure that we get this right at every point in time. Also, we are aware of the fiscalization process of the Nigeria Revenue Service now, and therefore we also need to understand that we need to remain compliant. Currently, companies that have revenue or gross turnover of 5 billion and above are now expected to have completed the process of e-invoicing. All because now any invoice that is not fiscalized and is not time-stamped through the automated system as integrated within the FRS or NRS platform will no longer be acceptable for tax deductibility, which then means that on one hand, you are creating a bigger exposure on yourself. And therefore, every organization needs to be technological ready and need to create a map that borders on these four quadrants: the data, the process, the people, and the control mechanisms that are built into it. Also, issues that borders on capacity gaps and inconsistent interpretation. Now, let me address capacity gap first. Capacity gap is where we need to now more or less brush ourselves up by way of learning session, training, workshops, and even acquiring skills externally, and also bringing competent people on board in order to help us within the system. And secondly, issue of inconsistent interpretations. And we could see that that also comes by way of simplicity of whatever regulation or what the law is. We could see of recent some little dynamics and misunderstanding that came as a result of the tax law, where certain interpretations were given and the likes. We then speak to the fact that sometimes ambiguity that are inbuilt in such regulation will create inconsistency in interpretation. Therefore, what else do we expect to do is to ensure that we seek guidance as far as practicable. We more or less do peer reviews. We more or less consult with our professional bodies, with our peers and the likes in order to get it right at every point in time. Also, dispute resolution. The time as a factor, the cost as a factor are also critical in whatever we do. And therefore, dispute at every point in time, I try to avoid it because it slows down your operation and it also serves as an avoidable burden on most of the things we do, as the case may be. But within these issues and challenges lie the opportunities. And what is that? Now, the opportunity is we need to design compliance into our process so that it is a proactive and a pragmatic adoption of compliance rather than a reactive. And what that simply means is that in our end-to-end processes, supply chain management process, which embeds procurement, your invoicing, your payroll system, and whatever system we have, we need to design compliance into it so that it's an integral part of it, rather than compliance as a result of deadlines or checklists. And therefore, in this regard, I encourage people to treat compliance more or less as a product requirement of every process, and which speaks to the intent and the objective of it. The other opportunity is that it allows us to strengthen our governance system And in today's world, strengthen your governance system, you can harness technology to develop dashboards for your top executives and the board of directors so that at every point in time and at a glance, they can see a bigger picture of your compliance dealings and requirements and how you have measured up to it. What are the key risk indices and factors? And which then means that in that case, all what they are looking at are risk-based. Again, we need to create a single source of truth. Even if we don't have the resources to build a blockchain, but mere digitalization using simple, robust system can help us more or less integrate all of our compliance requirements across functional areas into a single source of truth through technology, which means such technology are much more cloud-based and they could be partitioned in such a way that different functions more or less are able to carry out their own activity within their own space or fields, whereas those that have the governance responsibility, be it the board and executive management, can have a bigger view and a top-down view of the activities as the case may be. Now, also, use dispute options earlier. Now, for example, I'll use the one of the tax, what is common within the tax space, most especially as it's being promoted by the Nigerian Tax Act and the Nigerian Tax Administration Act. Now, today we now have issue of advanced tax ruling. We have issue of advanced tax pricing, that's transfer pricing and the likes, which then means that sometimes we can use these dispute options earlier so that before there's a dispute or disagreement with the regulator, we have more or less have a common understanding in dealing with an issue that is not something that is usual or is not common in doing such. But again, there are some other things you do that still result into dispute. And the beauty of it is that, for example, within the new tax space, we now have an independent, supposedly, ombudsman who can now fast track dispute between taxpayers and the tax authorities at every point in time. And therefore, this is also critical for us. And lastly, we need to build confidence for investors, our lenders, and also our strategic partners. And how do you build confidence is through ensuring credibility of your reporting and also ensuring that your governance structure is apt. And therefore, this more or less will provide a strong compliance signal so that it reduces whatever we would call regulatory risk, reputational risk, and some other things like that. And therefore, all of these things are critical in what we do at every point in time. And therefore, I will encourage us to do more of this. But again, to also run us just through what we are already familiar with. From the tax perspective, the four acts as enacted in 2025, which they took effect mostly on 1st of January 2026, what then do we need to be much more conscious of and aware of? Remember, we have the Nigerian Tax Act of 2025, and this act is more or less the consolidated tax code that consolidate over 10 to 12 taxes into a single source of truth. And therefore, this is one of the best things that will have happened and which has now happened to a country like us. And therefore, a lot of ambiguity and the like has been eliminated as far as practicable. And therefore, we need to take advantage of it. But what do you need to watch about? Key watch areas for our finance and business team include the new VAT mechanism that has been introduced. Now, VAT is now offsettable. Input VAT is now offsettable across board, be it on services, be it on assets, be it on goods, tangible or otherwise. Familiarize yourself with the new tax rates, most especially the stamp duty ad valorem, the withholding tax rates are based on their categories, VAT remain unchanged, and the likes. The incentives and various conditions that have to be fulfilled to enjoy such incentives, and most especially, how we now clearly delineate the taxation treatment of non-resident individuals and companies in Nigeria. Okay, now these are questions that come into mind that we need to look at in order to more or less go beyond just compliance towards creating value to enhance our competitiveness and sustainability. And part of them is which part of our revenue model are most sensitive to VAT and withholding tax changes so that we are not caught in a web. What incentive do we rely on and what are we evidencing eligibility? Do our cross-border arrangements create VAT or income tax exposure based on issues that borders on significant economic presence, SEP, or permanent establishment principle, PE, and the like? Now, also for the NTAA, NTAA stands for the Nigerian Tax Administration Act of 2025. This is a law that governs the administration for tax by the various revenue authorities, returns and assessment, how they are to be conducted. They also introduce penalty regimes and equally the process of enforcement. And therefore, this you need to watch out for to ask yourself, what are the deadline responsibilities do we have? Now, it has not changed from what it was before, where companies have to file return not later than 6 months after the year end. Not to file return of PE, annual PE returns for the year, not more, later than 31st of January subsequent year. VAT return not later than 21st of the following year, month, and the likes. All of these things are critical, and therefore, have you created your tax calendar or your regulatory calendar, as the case may be? Penalty regime is now critical. You will now be exposed to higher penalty, some as much as 40%, some as much as interest compounded based on MPR on an annual basis. And the penalty extends towards failure to file, failure to register, failure to keep record, failure to deduct, failure to remit, failure of allowing integration of Nigerian Revenue Service platform into your own system for the fiscalization obligation, which is the e-invoice. Therefore, these are also things we need to take note of. Now, the third and the fourth act border on the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Act of 2025 and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Act of 2025. This is more or less the institutional architecture that governs Nigerian Revenue Service, which is responsible for collection of revenue and assessment on behalf of the federal government and also the federation. And the federation is on the matter that borders on both federal government and the subnational, which are the states, and including local government as the case may be. And while the Joint Revenue Board is much more responsible to more or less create that point where all revenues authorities in Nigeria across the state, plus FCT, IRS, and the Nigerian Revenue Service, where they more or less share notes, share information, resolve territorial or jurisdictional issues and the like, in order to ensure that tax administration system in Nigeria is seamless. And what has really changed? Nothing has changed much than what it was before, but rather the institutional landscape includes now the Nigerian Revenue Service as a central administrator of the key federal taxes and including federation taxes, and the Joint Revenue Board structures include the tax appeal tribunal, and equally the tax ombuds that I've mentioned earlier. Now, the implication of this is that we should expect stronger coordination, information sharing, and more or less a formalized dispute channel. Now, for companies that have been escaping the net over years, sometimes when LRS come to audit you, you claim some stuff are in Abuja. But in today's world, there will be more or less harmonization of such audits and even share of information so that it will be difficult for any company to try to play game by trying to run away from one to another and be running back. Therefore, it won't be as easy as anyone may have found it before. And therefore, this more or less provides us an avenue whereby disputes are much more resolved in a timely manner, in a cost-effective manner, in an efficient manner, to the benefit of the taxpayer and even to the tax authority. All of these are critical. Now, just to more or less refresh what we know or what it seems that may have changed or we are not much more conscious of, I more or less put up some of these key compliance deadlines that are familiar to the finance community or the tax community or the legal community that borders on regulatory returns and filing. And of it, most of what you find here are for the tax returns. And also, I created just a simulator here that you can use to determine your compliance requirement based on your accounting year end, your incorporation, and you can calculate what is your due date of filing, as the case may be. Okay, now let me quickly now take us to penalty regime. So that I think if you understand how punitive it is going forward, maybe it will more or less reawaken us further about how we need to take compliance seriously. Okay, first is that when you fail to file returns, for your first month now, just failure for filing returns, you will be paying 100,000 for the first month, while you pay 50,000 for each subsequent month. The failure continues. But that still doesn't stop the liability, penalty, and interest on the amount that has not, like for tax, amount that is due that has not been paid because you've not filed returns. Okay, that's on one hand. What if you fail to remit taxes? Apart from paying the amount of tax, which is the principal amount, you still pay a fixed charge, which is a surcharge of 10%, which is a penalty, and you are still going to pay interest at the central bank monetary policy rate, which as of today is about 27%. Okay? And if they also find out that you have more or less doctored or do one or two things in order not to remit those taxes, you can equally face criminal prosecution, some of which come with sentences up to even 3 years, as the case may be, for principal officers. And therefore, we need to take note of all of this. Okay? And to be forewarned is to be forearmed. Let's also try and do our own best and get it right. Other one that I will also talk about is technology and fiscalization. Okay, as you are aware, bulk of it now is on e-invoice. And given that the law has now come into force, I believe Nigeria Revenue Service and the like will start to enforce it. And in order to increase the revenue targets, they might more or less start the sanction regime. And therefore, we need to take note of this. Now, for example, in the new tax laws, refusal to grant access for technological development after notice will cost you 1 million naira for the first day and 10,000 naira per subsequent day. Also, failure to process taxable supply to fiscalization system will cost you 200,000 naira flat plus 100% of tax due plus interest at prevailing CBN monetary policy rate. Equally, failure to deduct or withhold taxes, administrative penalty is 40% of the amount not deducted. Okay, which means if you are supposed to have deducted total tax of 10%, that is 100 million, and you didn't do that, once they audit you, you pay 40% addition, which is another 40 million, as the case may be. Therefore, the best thing for us is to create a technological system to help us do these things in such a way that human error is prevented as far as practicable. Now, what I've also done here is more or less create a simple schedule to say, let me assume 10 million naira is the amount of tax I've not paid. Okay? And let us say, and today we are aware that MPR rate is 27%. Therefore, what is the amount of tax that is due? And this is it. Not the amount of tax, and penalty and interest. First, they charge me penalty and interest of about 456 on just 10 million for 45 days. You can say now, all of these things are things we need to take note of, which then means that we need to create a lot of dashboard and checklist, and also much more use technology to drive it in order to ensure we get it right at every point in time. Now, let me quickly go to the aspect of Financial Reporting Council regulation. Most ones that are common today are internal control over financial reporting, what some of us know as ICFR, issue of corporate governance reporting and assessment, and issue now that is raging much more is evaluation, okay, reporting. Now, if we are familiar very well, you have the responsibility for management to assess the internal control over the financial reporting and provide evidence of that. And also, they need to more or less ensure that there's an independent attestation from the auditor to confirm the existence of a robust and a sound internal control over the financial reporting, and also control over the system, estimate, and disclosure, as the case may be. Now, for short, there are 5 pillars that we need to be aware of. The first pillar is the control environment, which means we set the tone, what are our ethical principles, what's the competence level of our responsibility officers, and what's our accountability framework like. Second one is risk assessment. How do we ensure we identify what can break our reporting, including fraud risk? Third one is the control activity, which borders on what is our approval processes, what is our reconciliation mechanism like, what is our segregation of duty like, so that no one person start and finish a transaction, and what are the form of ID controls, since today technology drives most of our reporting. Therefore, what are the IT controls we have in place? The fourth one is information and communication, and that borders on what's our data quality, including data integrity and privacy, as we are aware of, documentation process and the retrieval processes, and what are the reporting lines to our various stakeholders in a timely manner. Okay, and lastly is the monitoring, where we need to look at how do we ensure we test our processes, we validate our processes and control measures, remediation tracking, and continuous improvement, which is akin to the Kaizen theory. Now, all of these 5 pillars are much more the pillar adopted from the COSO framework that we all know before now. Okay, and that is that in that regard. Okay, the other aspect also borders on the corporate governance for companies. And we are aware that in 2018, the Financial Reporting Council issued the Nigerian Corporate Governance Code for corporate governance, and we have those basic things. And what they more or less tend to achieve for the betterment of the organization is to ensure, one, your board effectiveness, and that's why board assessment is also always required, independent assessment, risk oversight, ethical principles, also disclosures and transparency as a culture is also critical, and equally, activities that guarantee stakeholders' confidence. Now, I can show you some of the highlights in the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance. for 2018 as issued by the Financial Reporting Council. Now, the court emphasizes, as I said earlier, on board effectiveness, on integrity, on risk oversight, issues that borders on transparency and sustainable value creation. Now, for finance leaders like us, how does it translate? It translates into stronger disclosure discipline for us and clear accountability for controls. And that's why I find out that part of the requirement is that CEO and CFO now have additional responsibility, especially for public interest entities, of further attestation on the fact that the information contained in their financial report, in their financial statement, more or less reflects what has happened, so that they are now going to be personally responsible for any misinformation or misrepresentation that may have come into financial reports. And that is very key to us. Last, we look at valuation and reporting. Therefore, as I said earlier, we find out that bulk of what goes into our financial statements now are things that borders on our estimation, assumption, judgment, and most of it as a result of requirement of international financial reporting standards, such as fair value, which means estimating value that we believe is a reflection of the market, issue that borders on impairment assessment, which means what are the economic loss that an asset may have suffered, be it a financial instrument or financial asset or normal assets such as property, plant and equipment, and the likes. Also, the consistency of the methodology and appropriateness of the methodology for your valuation, and equally now, the regulator scrutiny will be enhanced. And this is to ensure that every other stakeholders, other than management and the board, who are saddled with the day-to-day activities, are protected as far as practicable. Okay, and therefore we need to familiarize ourselves with various valuation standards, including the one issued by the International Valuation Standard Council, and also for those that are franchise instrument based, we have the ISDA and the likes. Therefore, the valuation affects our fair value measurement, impairment assessment, provisioning, and more or less disclosure quality. Okay, and therefore we need to build control over this, and everything should be well documented because it must be validated and verifiable at every point in time. Therefore, here are some of the statutory reporting what list, most especially this affects certain sector and also affect those that are public interest entity, which means quoted companies, as the case may be. Okay, we just need to familiarize ourselves. And what I've also done is to just develop a simulator that can help you to more or less build risk register in this regard. Okay. Now, let's look at scenarios, as I've said earlier. Now, let me start with the tax scenario. Now, let's look at a situation. And this is the situation that most of us find ourselves. And this is the best time for us to more or less resolve it once and for all, so that we don't fall unnecessarily in this punitive tax regime with respect to penalty and interest. And what does this say here? Now let's look at the vendor that insists that withholding tax is your problem. You know, there are some vendors that will tell us, no, all what I want is 10 million naira, net of all taxes. But by our law, there's nothing like net of all taxes. Therefore, the question then is, how do you address this situation? Your contract is unclear, and deadline is near. What then do you do? Now, this is what I'm looking at. My scenario is saying that the key vendor insists that withholding tax is my obligation, whereas we all know that in law, in the tax law, withholding tax is an advance payment of income tax by who is earning the income, which is a vendor. Therefore, how can that be my own obligation, which is not? And where the problem starts from us is that when contracts are being executed, relevant stakeholders are not always carried along. Therefore, maybe in the contract, there is silence, there's no tax clause in the contract, or the task loss that is there is not exhaustive enough. But unfortunately, the payment is due for tomorrow. Therefore, what do we do? I'll ask a simple question. What is the compliance obligation and by when? 2. What evidence do we need for remittance and vendor communication? And 3. What do we do in 48 hours and 90 days in this regard? Now, in the simple thing we need to look at is that ask yourself, withholding tax is required by law, therefore it's not by my doing. And the law has defined whose obligation it is and whose responsibility it is. Also, the provision of the law now says that when we withhold, as to prove that I've withhold, I must issue you a receipt so that you can use that to more or less hold me accountable for withholding. Also, we need to educate and notify our vendors. And at the point of contracting, we need to be clear and specific. And we are not bound to work with the vendor. There are other vendors, therefore, which means everything has to be clear from the conceptualization stage up to the point of contracting. And we need to update our contract template based on the dynamics and changes that has happened in the most recent period. And we then need to strengthen our procurement tax classification. And these are the things that we need to look at. Another one borders on the ICFR weakness. Now, this process depends on one person. Reconciliations are late. Evidence is very clear. Therefore, I'll ask you this question. Which controls are key and what evidence prove our operation? The next question I will ask is, what are the separation of duty and IT controls gap that exist? And the last question would be, what is your minimum viable ICFR program in 90 days? The guide I can give is that we must always define our key control within our system. We must be able to identify and assign who the owner of those controls are. We need to standardize our process of documentation, providing evidence, supportive evidence at every point in time, and there must be implementation review sign-off at every point in time. And periodically, if not later than quarterly, we need to carry out control testing. And that can be the function of our internal audit function and some other things in order to do self-assessment so that we are not caught in the web by regulation or by the regulator. And also on the valuation challenge. Now, fair value, which is an estimation of market value, moves materially. Now, both our regulator and our external auditor has asked us to show working, because fair value goes by way of our assumptions, by ways of our forecast, by ways of our basis of estimation and methodology. Therefore, we need to be the one to prove that that fair value is a reflection of the current value that can mimic what market participants will have determined or exchange it for. And therefore, what are the critical questions I will ask? What governance surrounds our valuation judgments? What is our process of documentation? Because those are the things that will serve as verifiable evidence when independent party is to carry out an assessment. And how do we also ensure consistency in our methodology from period to period? And therefore, the guide that I provide is you must have a policy. At every valuation point, you must also develop a ballpark or evaluation memo that documents your methodology, your source of information, your assumption, your data, and some other things. Assumption register is critical. You must conduct sensitivity to look at what would be the change in my evaluation metric based on changes in certain underlying assumptions. Independent review and assessment is always encouraged so that an independent third party can also do double check, and also consistency in model governance are equally critical. And therefore, these are things that we need to take note of. Now, doing that will now take me back to those questions I said I'm going to trigger. And the first one is on risk governance. And what are our top 5 regulatory risks and who owns each? We must be able to define that as an organization. Today, if you have not defined that as an organization, sit down and ask yourself, this our company, what are the 5 regulatory risks that are critical to us? And the question then is, regulatory risk 1, ownership. Which function will be responsible for it or is responsible for it? And therefore, there are also guides that are put here where you can create a dashboard or a document or a ballpark that will characterize it from the risk statement to how you quantify your inherent risk, what are the key controls you are putting in place to ensure it doesn't crystallize, who is the owner or who are responsible, and how do you measure the milestone. Similarly, you ask ourselves, our compliance, is it by design? Which means, is it integral to our processes? Or is it something that is just heroic effort? Which means something that is much more reactionary or something that is more or less reactive. And therefore, I also now put it there in this case that if the compliance owner is on leave, you ask yourself a simple question: can the organization still ensure they file their returns? Can they still provide supporting evidence? The question then is, if these answers are no, therefore it means you are in heroic mode. That means that as of today, you need to sit down and ensure that responsibility about your compliance is not kept in the hand of any person, but it's integral of your system, processes, and control measures. Likewise, where could a small miss become a public issue? This is where we find out that sometimes regulatory risk can become a reputational risk that can even affect your dealings with your other stakeholders, including your bankers, your financiers, your suppliers, and the like. And the same thing happens to tax discipline. Which statutory deadlines are non-negotiable for us in 2026? You ask yourself, because if they are non-negotiable, it means you'll be exposed to penalty, you'll be exposed to interest, you might be exposed to enforcement, and some other issues. Therefore, do the checklist to addressing that. Do we know our penalty exposure if a remittance slips? You ask yourself that question also. And what then do you need to do? Develop your calendar for more or less remittances, your tax calendar, so that you don't miss up anything. All of these are things that I believe once you have access to this material, you can get it done as fast as practicable. Okay. Therefore, at a closure, as I wrap up, I believe organization therefore can develop any of these things or all of them as the case may be. How do you have a single source of truth by way of calendar for your compliance requirement? Which means, do you have a tax calendar? Do you have a statutory reporting calendar? And what are the ownership, evidence, and escalation processes look like? One control map. Your internal controls over your financial reporting entails revenue assurance, cost ascertainment of verification, payroll processes, tax processes, valuation processes, ICFR evidence repository, quarterly control self-assessment check, and the likes. And also, if you are able to create a one dispute playbook, where is a source of information where every form of your disputes or your audit queries, your challenges with regulators at the stage in which they are, actions required, and some other things are documented so that there is no one that is left unturned. Like in this new tax regime, if the tax authority has written to you sufficiently and within the time required by law, and you fail as an organization to respond appropriately to them, once that time elapses, therefore, the tax authority may have no option other than to more or less issue you a final assessment. And once you contest it, they can issue you a NORA, which means they refuse to amend it, or because your rights has expired, because you have a time bound for you to respond or to challenge their position, as the case may be. All of these things are critical in what we do. And in summary, I think what I'm going to conclude is that let us take compliance as something that we design as an integral part of our processes, of our system, rather than compliance as just a regulatory requirement or a regulatory tool. Because compliance can be used to create value, to support value, and to ensure that we remain competitive and sustainable in our business dealing. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that tax masterclass. Thank you. I'm sure like our participants gained one or two things from this session. So next up we'll have Dr. Eno Udoma Enyang. She's the CEO, Managing Director of MBRE Travels and Tours. Dr. Enyang, you have the floor, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, can you let me share?
Yes, ma'am, you have the right to share.
I'm trying to share, but it's not.
I can see your screen, ma'am.
Oh, really? And I can't. Like Victoria said, technology is only good when it works.
Maybe you can stop sharing and
What are you?
okay. I can see your email.
Oh gosh,
That's what
and
I
I
can
can't.
see. So you can stop sharing
Oh,
and
okay,
share again.
maybe. Sorry, just a minute.
All right.
Can you see my screen now? Okay, maybe this is what I'm not doing right. Sorry, just a minute.
Yes, I can see your screen now.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're on now. Sorry, I'm not sure my video is showing.
No, your video is not showing. Like you can see your face, or you can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I have to stop sharing and go back so I can get my video on, okay? Sorry about that. Now my video is showing. Aha. All right. Yes. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. And a happy new year. For those that I haven't wished a happy new year. When you're speaking third on a topic, on one topic, and especially when very powerful people have spoken, it makes work easier for you. You just go straight and it's a smooth ride. Especially the DG, his opening statement more or less covered almost everything I want to talk about. So I think basically just to set, the direction in terms of what I'm trying to do here. Basically, we're trying to understand Nigeria's legislative and regulatory risk environment going into 2026. So, of course, a lot has been said about the various things that are happening, but I want to sort of put it in a bucket so that everyone can see what it's looking like, generally speaking. And then, of course, we need to identify what the compliance risks are. A lot of this has been spoken to. So when I get to each of these points, I won't spend too much time. I'll just highlight certain things that I think maybe are important and haven't been already highlighted. Then basically to know what strategies to put in place. A lot has been said about that. I'll just pick out things that I think are important to emphasize, and then the advantages of compliance. I won't go into the environment and I won't go into the definitions because I think we know that. Of course, we know what the environment is like. The DG spoke a bit to that. But just looking at the landscape, the DG spoke about it being a pre-election year, and that was my very first point because it's very important. In a pre-election year, you have certain attributes or certain attributes of a pre-election year that are usual. And so you have higher IGR drive because you need money for elections. And I think the DG spoke to that. But just to add another thing, there's also a lot of policy activity because a lot of those that are vying for elective positions are trying to endear themselves. So they're trying to position, not just endear themselves, but also even position for the elections to favor them in various ways. So there's a lot of policy and legislative activities. Now, in terms of the features of our landscape, we already know that overlapping mandate, duplication of multiple taxations, overlapping regulators. And I mean, there are so many examples. The DG already spoke to the issue around FRC. I'll speak a bit on the National Assembly as well. And, you know, overlapping regulatory powers that they try to exercise over corporate organizations. And of course, we know what is happening now, higher penalty, higher stronger aggressive enforcement of penalties. And of course, that invariably causes a huge cost in compliance. Now, another aspect is the frequent policy and legislative change, which I have mentioned in relation to an election, pre-election year. But generally speaking, this is a feature of our landscape. I mean, for instance, you have Section 88 of the Constitution that empowers the National Assembly to investigate, obviously to investigate in relation to agencies and government bodies, because those are the ones that they legislate over. But they've tried to exercise these rights beyond that limit and has resulted in sector groups and even NECA going to court for an interpretation of this section. And even recently, there was an attempt to smuggle this into the constitutional review to ensure that they have those rights over private companies. So these are some of the things that you're going to see in 2026 as we progress. And then, of course, expanding sector-specific requirements, which the DG also spoke to, where you have Financial Reporting Council, you have FCCPC, you have the environmental bodies, all of them acting as regulators to various organizations, which have their own sector regulators. The licensing issues, where you have to get a license to do all kinds of things, even though you have a sector license to operate. So there's been a lot of activity around that. And of course, the DG mentioned the issue with FRC and the expansion of the definition of public interest entities to include regulated companies, which has now brought about, you know, all kinds of dues. And I mean, there was a lot of activity last year where we had to go to Abuja and engage with different bodies to try and ensure that this was nipped in the bud. So what do we need? We need board oversight on legislative and regulatory exposure. We need board oversight. I think every speaker has mentioned, or at least two, Victoria and Dr. Adebayo have mentioned the issue of board oversight, and I'll speak a little bit about that also. I mean, when Dr. Adebayo spoke about corporate governance, he mentioned that. Of course, the tax, that's the big elephant in the room. The changes that will shape 2026, that's the big elephant in the room. And that's why I believe Dr. Adebayo did justice to doing the analysis in terms of how to manage those risks. The reason why, for me, this is really exciting is that one of the issues that we've highlighted on multiple levels of regulators and multiple levels of taxation and illegal taxation. And so one of the things that the new tax reform regime seeks to do is to consolidate the framework. And if this is done effectively, obviously, it will be fantastic. I mean, Dr. Adebayo has spoken a lot about this. We see so many, and I've highlighted some of the critical areas that I see for a lot of the corporate organizations within NECA that are important to note. However, I won't go into the details of this, except just to say that it's important for organizations to do a thorough review of the tax regime. Because, you know, when a new law comes into force, there's a lot of resistance. We've had all kinds of, we've had KPMG raising some issues. We've had even the legislators raising issues, saying things were smuggled in that were not there. We've had all kinds of things around it. So I think this is a time to settle in and have an understanding of what it is. And, but one thing that, apart from the consolidation, another thing that I think will be very interesting is to see the automation work, because the automation will not only work in terms of making it transparent for corporate organizations, but also making it transparent even for the tax authorities, because and for government, because you are sure that whatever you are doing, if it's fully automated, that because some of us are worried about paying tax, where is the tax going? So I think that's important to do. Another thing was another major change was the capital market. The Investment and Securities Act 2025 came into force, and basically it's to modernize the regulatory framework for the ISA regulatory framework. And I think that a lot of the things that it seeks to do has already started. We've already started seeing the results of that. Because from my research, I understand that we made it was about 4%, over 4% increase in the capital market. And the NGX All Shares Index rose over 51% in 2025, and market cap close to 100 trillion. So I think this is fantastic. And it just shows that some of these initiatives and policy initiatives are working. And these are things we can take advantage of in 2026. Another thing, obviously, is the financial sector. The reason why I have raised this as critical is because I think that everybody needs to monitor what's going on in that space. We may think that it doesn't affect us. Whether you can cash money or whether you can't cash money, how does it affect you? Just to highlight that, I mean, the policy drive throughout, in fact, before 2025 and throughout 2025 was to ensure that there was a cashless economy. But as we can see, not too long ago, there was a somersault of that policy. And now there's an expansion of withdrawal limits and etc. So, I mean, it just shows that you need to really monitor closely, because this impacts you. A lot of these policies impact us, whether we think we're in that sector or not. Also, trade and industrial regulations. These also impact every sector, even though a lot of the things I've highlighted in terms of the exports and import control have to do with manufacturing. For instance, exporting raw shea nuts has been banned, timber, hides and skin. In fact, the president came out with an executive order banning, I think, shea nuts for, I think, about 6 months. And there's a bill right now that is being processed on the floor of the House. No, rather, it's actually gone to the president for assent, requiring that at least the shea butter must be processed for at least 30% of it must be processed before it can be exported. So we need to really be familiar with the customs prohibition list. There's also the issue of imports. The mayonnaise, I just want to highlight this so that my expectation is that those that haven't already done this need to go and really look at this list to see how it may impact their business. So sectors tied to agriculture and manufacturing especially. However, there are other bans that go beyond those sectors. For instance, I know that SIM cards are banned now, even though that's the telecoms, under telecoms regulations, the local content development. So these are things that I think we need to watch out for this year. In summary, there's the tax side, tax and revenue, there's a capital market, there's the banking policies, trade policies, and then sector regulations. And of course, the sectors, like I said, it cuts across. There's also the power side. The Electricity Amendment Act came up last year. And so there's going to be a lot of activity around that. States now can distribute power and all that. And that is a huge change. And I just highlighted here that there are close to 1,000 bills pending at the National Assembly. That's just to show you that there's going to be a lot of activity, and it's important to monitor this. So just to highlight, what is it that causes pitfalls with organizations internally and externally? Externally, of course, we've talked about regulatory overlap and conflicting instructions, which we can't do too much about except to try and lobby government, inconsistent enforcement practices. You can see even the new tax laws. One of the things that the legislators raised as being something that was smuggled in was being able to carry out administrative sanctions. So you can arrest without warrant. Those were the areas that they said were areas that were highlighted as being smuggled in and which people frowned against, because you should be able to separate the power. You can't be the judge in your own cause. You should be able to go to court to be able to enforce. Of course, there are bureaucracies around approvals and permits. And of course, if we look at it from a strategic point of view, there are ways to also deal with that. And of course, unethical practices. My own philosophy is when you go to engage with the agencies or with any one in government, you need to make them know what you stand for as an organization or what your organization stands for. Once they know what you're when you come, they'll say, this one, there is no point going in that direction because they don't do this thing. So I think that is basically a well-structured regulatory and legislative framework anchored by a clear implementation plan encourages compliance and constructive partnership. Within the organization, what happens? I think Victoria mentioned the issue of firefighting, reactive compliance. How can you then not be reactive? One, you have to have structures in place. Two, you have to be involved. Be involved from the policy formation stage. Don't just sit down and say other organizations will go to NECA and when the results come, we'll get it, because you will lose out because some things may be peculiar to you. So firefighting is one of the things that we struggle with internally. Limited internal compliance capacity. You don't have the capacity to handle compliance, and capacity involves a lot of things. Weak internal ownership of compliance. Treating compliance as, it's for legal. No, it's not. And I think Victoria mentioned it. It cuts across the whole organization at different stages. So you have to identify the touch points, the compliance touch points. For the documentation and record keeping. I think it was Dr. Adebayo that mentioned the issue of when the agency comes to you to say you haven't done this, or the tax authority comes to say you haven't done it, you are the one that has to show them. A lot of agencies don't have any documentation. And even if they do, they will hide it if they want to take advantage. So you have to have proper record keeping and documentation. And then, of course, engagement. We cannot overemphasize that. Most sanctions do not arise from bad intent or from poor systems. What should businesses do? Move from reaction to strategy. I've talked about that a bit. Boards must own compliance. It must be from the top. Monitor regulatory changes proactively. And I mentioned that you might see a bill or a potential policy document, and you may say it doesn't have anything to do with me, what's my own insight? Like, for instance, I talked about the banking sector. It doesn't have anything to do with me. That was what we did. I was in the telecoms sector at the time, and we sat down and we saw the Police Act. We didn't even bother about it. But lo and behold, when the enforcement came, they said we had to pay 0.005% of net profit, every corporate organization. And we're like, why? Because there's a provision in the Police Act that provides for a fund. And the fund, guess where it's coming from? It's from you and I. So monitoring is very important, and monitor everything. Just go scan through, see whether there's anything like, fund or something, because your name is probably on that. Also, you must embed compliance into enterprise risk management. I think Victoria mentioned that already. Strengthen your internal controls, your documentation and reporting is very, very important. Invest in staff awareness and compliance training. Maintain constructive engagements with regulators. Cannot overemphasize that. NECA remains a critical partner in advocacy and engagement. Engage NECA. Tell them as it is. So basically, the practical strategies to do this, which I have touched on, but just to highlight them so that it's easy to follow, is one, from the governance side, governance and leadership, board oversight, compliance as a standing management agenda is very important. Clear accountability, you must be very clear as to who owns what. There's the different departments, HR and all that, they all have compliance responsibilities, and that must be clear. In the internal compliance, you must have internal compliance system. In the system, you must have compliance checklists and calendars, and I think Dr. Adebayo spoke to that already. Periodic internal audits, employee training and awareness, and strong documentation culture. On the engagement side, you must constructive regular engagement is necessary. Early clarification of obligations is also necessary. Like today that we had Dr. Adebayo just try and run us through what we need to do to be in compliance with the Finance Act. And of course, NECA, you need to be actively involved. And participation in policy consultation. Don't say, let them do it and then we will benefit at the end. It doesn't work. You have to be in the forefront of it. And then compliance as a competitive advantage. These are the results: reduced enforcement exposure and operational disruptions, stronger regulator trust. Once you're engaging with the regulator, they trust you better because you're having conversations and you also have a better relationship with them. Improved investor confidence, enhanced corporate reputation and governance credibility, which I think Dr. Adebayo mentioned. And then, of course, sustainability and resilience. Your organization is more sustainable that way. And then I just want to make a recommendation from my experience. And what I always tell organizations is that, look, when they ask the question, what is the sort of organizational structure we should have to cater for effective compliance? I say it depends on the organization, however you want to structure. But the most important thing is that the role of compliance and regulatory management must be clearly encapsulated. And then typically what you would find is to have maybe ethics and compliance as a unit, risk and audit and internal control as a separate unit, then regulatory affairs, then legal and company secretary. But what is most important is that the roles and the responsibilities must be very clearly delineated. Interrelationship of all the roles, proper checks and balances, and no to warehousing of checks and balances in one role. There must be independence of the compliance functions. And then you must have proper structures, policies, protocols for responses to regulatory queries and letters, and etc. Then you must have a robust checklist. And I think Dr. Adebayo spoke how you can automate that. Have a proper checklist of regulatory returns and compliance requirements. And of course, zero tolerance for non-compliance within the organization. And you must have a standard reporting. ideally, what you should have is a risk and audit committee that takes those reports from the compliance unit or whoever is responsible to send those reports. It should actually be part of the enterprise, and I think Victoria mentioned that, of the enterprise risk management of the organization. And then, of course, you have periodic risk assessments, mitigation, and control. So what are the key takeaways? Regulatory risk is unavoidable. They will be there, but you have to manage them. Strong internal compliance system are a must. Early engagement prevents costly enforcement. Strong compliance builds strong and resilience, trust and resilience, sorry. And then, of course, you must have collective OPS voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Okay.
ma'am. For
You wanted
yes,
me to
I can hear you.
continue. I have more slides.
Thank you. Thank you
All
for
right,
thank you
thank
for
you.
wrapping up just in time. Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am. Thank you for your presentation, especially with respect to how legislative challenges translate into real business obligations. Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am.
thanks.
All right. So finally, we'll be moving to Mr. Ifeanyi Okonkwo, who is a partner at Stillwaters Law Firm, for his presentation. Mr. Okonkwo, you have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tomiloba. Can you confirm if you can see my slide?
Yes, I can see a slide, sir.
Hello?
Yes, I
Okay,
can see
all
a
right.
slide.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank
So I think the speakers before me have done great justice to introducing the need for taking compliance and regulatory measures seriously, especially for 2020.
Mr. Okonkwo, we are struggling to hear you. I think the network is seizing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So what we have observed is that 2026 is a critical point for Nigeria in terms of regulation evolution. And following the disruptive and, dare I say, audacious legislations that have come up from 2023 to now, shows that we are actually moving more into the era of some disruptive regulatory legislations. And of course, we see in 2023, when the Nigerian Data Protection Act came to be. In 2024, other legislation followed, and in 2025, including the guide. And now we are at a stage where implementation is the major focus of each regulatory agency. And intelligence gathered is showing that for 2026, most of these government agencies have been tasked to, get revenue for government. So where we are leaving the phase of awareness on regulatory compliance to more of implementation, enforcement, and sanction. Now, I'll be focusing on two areas. That is the data privacy as well as intellectual property. Some of the laws which comes to the Nigerian Tax Act, but I'll focus strictly on, as it concerns intellectual property, and then the National Intellectual Property Policy and Strategy for 2025, Investment and Securities Act 2025, National Digital Economy and E-Governance Bill, which is to, from all indications, is to take place, to be signed into law by March this year. And then Nigerian Data Protection Act, which now is in its execution phase according to the NDPC, and NDPA Guide 2025, which has also made more demands beyond what we we saw in the NDPA, that's the Nigerian Data Protection Act. And then the Nigeria Data Protection Amendment Bill, because the act is currently also going through some sort of amendments, but that's yet to be brought before the public. Now, the key IP issues are these. The Tax Act, either the ones signed by the president or the one approved by the National Assembly, whichever one thing is certain, they both carry the chargeable tax to include chargeable assets, which includes intangible assets. So whenever you are doing a sale or transferring or doing licensing of intangible assets, those will come to play. Now, it appears that this would increase business owners' tax. And so we have to be aware of it, because most times we are used to the usual brick and mortar calculations. But now, even when you are dealing with your intangible assets, which most businesses tend to overlook, you now have to have a proper and intentional model where you begin to identify your intangible assets and see how how tax would play on those intangible assets. Now, it's not all gloomy, so to speak, but there is also an opportunity here for companies who are complaining that the 30% of capital gains tax, that's for non-small companies. There is an opportunity here, because if you look at the first schedule, you see that part of the capital expenditure allowance includes research, expenses made in research on intangible assets, right? So if you begin now to document those processes, you could actually be enjoying at the end of the day some incentive in terms of allowance. Then valuation, I think Dr. Adebayo spoke about that. But as in regards to intellectual property, more than ever, this will become a thing, because now when intangible assets are being taxed and when the tax authorities are insisting on arm's length principle, one thing is for certain: you cannot, argue by words or by assumption, talking about market value. There would now be a serious case of doing some intellectual property auditing, where you begin to audit to find out what your intangible assets are, what they mean, are they weak, are they providing income, what can be done, as well as finding out what they are in terms of monetary value. You now need to engage IP auditors as well as IP valuers to help to rather kind of open up your other side of the business, which is the intangible assets. And a lot of companies, big chip companies, have been doing this for so many years. And of course, because most companies are unaware of the aspect of their business called the intangible property or intellectual property, most companies leave this place unattended to. Now, this is going to be a problem, especially in relation to tax. Now, we also saw that the Tax Act has introduced value-added service providers and IP. This one now is ISA. ISA has brought in value-added service providers to the IP marketplace. So those offering and selling things like NFTs, the platform, digital assets, they will now have to seek set license and follow the FCCPC guidelines. Now, also the tax as defined royalty has now been properly defined as income from disposal of intangible assets. So more than what we know before, now it's very certain. There cannot be any argument anymore that your intangible assets would come into play. And also, we now see that there is this emerging technologies and AI, generative AI and the rest of them, they are now very much at play. Now, the NDEEG, which is the National Digital Economy and E-Governance Bill, which is due to come in March this year, has made a lot of lengthy provisions around digital assets in the ecosystems, and also making certain rules that would govern and regulate AI use. So now companies more than ever must document in fact, first of all, you must have some sort of framework and policy on how you use AI. And you see, the IT guys, a whole lot, they need to be educated on this, because that is where most times we've seen from practice that is where the loophole comes from. So they would need to be educated in terms of the AI tools they are taking. Where are they taking it from? Is it from some sort of place that they believe to be a public domain? But what are those rules governing, the use of those APIs that they are taking? Then when they develop or they are coding, what are they bringing in from outside? All these things will need to be checked. You need to keep proper documentation of your inputs. What are you bringing in? And what are they borrowing from outside? Because all this will go into ownership issues to, find out whether, imagine if your business rests on a particular technology. In fact, that is the lifeblood of the business activities. And then you find that thinking that it's all yours, you then find that it's not yours, that you guys have been in infringement all along after so many years. That would really, really be a problem. And now we see that the Nigerian Copyright Commission early this year has reinstated and reinforced their commitment to pursuing every complaint or cases of copyright infringement. And they have already started to enforce this. Now, with regards to data privacy, there are some myths that we need to correct. And let's not assume, I wanted to, at first, I didn't want to go through this slide, but I will rush over it quickly just for the purpose of assuming we have such myths here. Let's correct them. So despite the exclusion of certain kinds of use of personal data under Section 3 of the NDPA, competent authorities and journalists are still expected to abide with principles of data processing, lawful basis, appointment of data protection officer, breach notification where there's a data breach, and observing of data subject rights. So even if you feel that you do not come within the provision, at least those things that have been mentioned are critical. There are still obligations that needs to be fulfilled based on the Act. Now, moving further, the obligations of data controllers and processors generally, and when we say data controllers and processors, we are talking about if you are processing personal data, information that could identify or that identifies someone, we are looking at things like names, their IP address, their phone numbers, bank accounts, all those sort of things comes under personal information. And if you're a data controller who controls how those information are to be used, or you are a processor who is the one whose hand those informations are being mined, you come under these provisions. And it's saying the obligation, the regulatory provision is saying that you must register. And I'll come to that because registration has to do with where the category you fall in. And I'll discuss that shortly. Another compliance measures is that you must comply with the NDPA principles of data processing. How you process data. Are you processing it in a transparent manner? Do you have lawful basis for processing it? What is your data minimization policy? What of your data retention policy? All those principles will come in here. Then you have to do an annual NDPA compliance audit. It's annually done. You engage a DPCO who then audits the company and file, the compliance audit annually. Now, you are also supposed to appoint a certified DPO to file what we call the compliance audit returns. Now, there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace as to whether the compliance audit returns is what they mean by compliance audit. There are two different things. If you look at Article 7 of the guide that was brought in middle of 2025 and started execution late 2025. So the NDPA compliance audit is done annually. Then the DPO that has been appointed, there's something the DPO has to do before the 31st of March yearly. Of course, the DPO would have to file what we call the compliance audit returns. Be it that most of these contents can be, gotten from the report that will be submitted to you by your DPCOs during the NDPA compliance audit. This is why it's critical also that the DPCOs you use are actually experts who understand these things and not just some sort of cross-check compliance process. So now you also need to provide what we call, and keep a record of what we call the schedules of compliance. Then the organization-wide sensitization on data privacy and protection, right? And then you need to develop, review, and publish your privacy policy. Some persons are using privacy policies that are over 3 years old, 2 years old. It's important. In fact, if you are using a privacy policy of 3 years old, and it has not been reviewed as of last year, middle of last year, it is now due for renewal. And I say this because there are certain provisions that have been introduced by guide that ought to be in your privacy policy. Then obstructive display of cookie notices is now what is being expected. So it's no longer the case where your cookie notice will be at the end bottom part of your website, written in small letters. No. As soon as somebody is entering the website or whichever technology model you use, there should be some sort of, a pop-out notice on cookies, because immediately someone is entering the website, what is happening? The cookie is already at play, collecting the IP address. So that is why that is now one of the expectations from the NDPC. Now, strategy circulation on data privacy direction and third-party vendor contract agreements, all these need to be reviewed in line with the new principles or the further demands that have been made by the guide 2025. Now, DPIA, which is data protection impact assessment, ought to be done when you're processing activities or using a software that processes personal data. And these activities are such that it could pose high risk on data subjects' rights of freedom. You ought to conduct a DPIA, a data protection impact assessment. This is different from a compliance audit. Now, you ought to also have a record of policy in place for breach notification. When there is a breach notification, you ought to, within 72 hours, inform the commission on this, and also immediately inform data subjects where, of course, the breach is such that it poses high risk to the data subjects. Now, there's something called privacy by design. I think Dr. Adebayo mentioned it, and the last speaker as well. It's no longer, in fact, this helps companies and businesses a lot, apart from the fact that it's a regulatory requirement. It actually helps you and puts you at a place of ease so that things function systematically. Whether you're there or you're not there, things are going on smoothly. Privacy by design is such that when you're, for instance, going to admit or take in a technology, the IT department is supposed to alert your DPO and management and say, oh, we're bringing this technology to do X, Y, Z. Immediately, you call your DPCOs to look through that technology and conduct what we call the DPIA. And then they will make recommendations to say, oh, let this technology, or even if it is internally being coded, right? You say, oh, let's put X, Y, Z in this place so that it will be in compliance with the act. Oh, in this place, remove this, let's do this. So that way, when the system is launched, or even when the business activities progresses day to day, that way, naturally, by default, the act is being complied with. And this is where the NDPC is trying to push most companies to this year. And this is why there's going to be a lot of fines. Last year alone, we saw that they released a list of 3,000 businesses who they believe are defaulting, that they are not NDPA compliant unless they show otherwise. And of course, you know, the Nigerian culture, as soon as we also any person on the list, we're like, this company, they are non-compliant. And it's always very difficult to erase that from the people's mind as soon as, you know, that bad publicity goes out. So this is why it's also critical. And they have mentioned that, of course, this year they will be releasing more lists and going into several other sectors. Now, the data protection of major importance are categorized into 3 levels. We'll have the ultra high level, the extra high level, and the ordinary high level. The ultra high level, what you're supposed to do is you register once, only once. If you've done that, then you are compliant. But you are supposed to also file CAR through your DPO, and then you're also supposed to do the compliance audit where you engage your DPCOs annually. If you are under the extra high level, you're supposed to register once, file CAR annually, and audit annually. But if you are under the ordinary high level, you are supposed to renew your registration annually, but you don't need to file CAR. But also you will need to audit. You need to do your audit annually. So these are the major confusion. That's what most people don't know now. And once this list comes out, these are the things you'll be asked to present. How do you know whether you are in ultra high or extra high or lower high? First of all, you need to understand what it means to be a controller or processor of major importance. Because it is the controllers or processors of major importance that the NDPC are majorly focused on. You're a controller or processor of major importance where you process personal data of more than 200 data subjects within 6 months. And you carry out any ICT service or any digital device which has a storage capacity for storing personal information. Or means you process more than 200, then you cannot have this. You process personal data and you are in the sector, in the following sector: aviation, communication, education, electric power, export, import, financial, health, hospitality, insurance, oil and gas, tourism, e-commerce, or public service. So in the first category, you can see that almost everybody have that kind of storage capacity. So you're already in. It's now a question of whether you process up to 200 personal data within 6 months, right? Then the second phase is, even if you don't have that kind of storage capacity, if you are within this sector, if you're a player within this sector, automatically you process 200 personal data and above, automatically you are a data processor of major importance. Now, the expectation from the regulators is that if you are under ultra high level, you are supposed to keep the highest global attainable standards for data processing. So it's not just, it goes beyond the NDPA. It also includes what developed countries like the European Union are doing. And then let's say you process or you have up to 5,000 personal data in your record. So you fall under ultra high. If you're under extra high, it means you're supposed to keep to a global best practice. And of course, you process up to 1,000 personal data. This one has no cap as to in 6 months or 1 month. At least you have up to that amount of personal data. Now, ordinary high level has to do with 200 and above. So key privacy issues and challenges. In 2026, we envisage that there will be some sort of dual regulatory tension, because the NDPC and NIDA are based on, that's if the NDEEG Act, that's that bill, if it comes to law, we foresee that there is going to be that problem. So most businesses will be struggling to keep to the provisions of the NDPA as well as the provisions of the NDEG. So you are interfacing between NDPC and NIDA. Then we also see that it is important now, and this is critical, it is important now that businesses begin to think data localization. This is because from our assessment, we can see that Nigeria is moving, like so many other countries really, moving towards what we call data localization, where they want your storage of data, of personal data, to be within Nigeria. So far, you're a Nigerian company or you're doing business in Nigeria, they want it to be within Nigeria. That way, it allows them to, basically data sovereignty claims and all that. And because data is becoming of course, it's the gold, and it's becoming more and more important, even in the political sphere. It is now critical that companies have control over the data within their territory. So if companies don't begin now to plan for it, perhaps towards the end of 2026, there will be a lot of tension and pressure. Now, NDPC. Now, sorry, let me also state that it doesn't mean that cross-border transfer will be totally eliminated, but rather it will be closed. So it will be tightened so that before you do a cross-border, there will be some certain things you would have to observe beyond what is currently in the Nigerian Data Protection Act, because right now it is very, very minute. Then thirdly, the NDPC, as I think I've spoken about this, the blacklist. Fear of the blacklist is the beginning of wisdom, so to speak. And this list will be published this year as well. Now, where breach leads to financial fraud, but the burden of proof is on the data controller to show that they were not negligent. So it is also important to keep documentations of what you have done so far to protect personal data. Because at that time, it will not be a word of mouth, it will be evidence showing that we have done this, we've done that, we do this every day, so we are not negligent. Employees and Nigerians are more aware of privacy laws now. What this means is that there will be increased whistleblowing, and the litigation for 2026, of course, we've seen that litigation has increased since the past 2 years, but it will even go very high in 2026. And it is critical that companies begin to, tighten up their data processing activities. Now, the court attitude also for the past 3 years has been bending more towards protecting privacy rights. And of course, this is understandable because privacy rights is also a matter of the fundamental rights as enshrined in the Constitution. So that is where the court's attitude is bending more. It's only when perhaps the data subject is unable to show the reason why their data privacy have been breached. That is when those cases are not successful, because the onus of proof to show, for instance, that consent of the data subject was obtained is on the employer, is on the data controller. And then the NDPC, like other government agency, has been tasked to generate revenue, like I said before. So this year we see that there will be a lot of sanction, there will be a lot of fines. It will be more of enforcement than compliance directives. Now, cyber threat is also on the rise. And the funny thing is that as far as cyberbullying and other cyber malicious penetrations are concerned, they are getting more sophisticated day by day. For instance, you could get a message actually from, maybe if you're not patient enough to click the email to find out whether that is the email of the director of or the manager of the company, you might just see his name and it will come in such a way saying that, oh, can you quickly do XYZ or do so thing? You think it's an instruction, you go and execute it and there's a problem. So they are getting more sophisticated. They are no longer as naive. So it's important that there is high-level training of staff on cybersecurity, and especially your IT team. And from time to time, it is now best practice really to do what we call penetration tests. Penetration tests are where you, not your internal people who knows how the system has been created, you engage professionally some cybersecurity experts and ask them to attempt a penetration into your system. So when they do that, of course, it will be by writing, you are giving them consent so that eventually it doesn't turn out to be a breach on their part. When they do that, you then begin to see the loopholes. And some DPCOs also offer these services. Enhanced compliance requirements than ever before, like I said, and then AI and emerging tech. There will be heightened regulation, expectation of compliance, and of course, it means higher costs to businesses. Especially based on the NDEEG, what we see there is that the AI regulation would be such that it will be placed on low, middle, and high risk. And those that will fall under the high risk are those dealing with finance, healthcare, and public service. And then other people might come in within middle risk. The penalties are as bad as 10 million or 2% of your annual revenue. Finally, what are the things we need to do? I've mentioned 9 things here in summary. Companies, businesses need to have an internal IP framework and policy that addresses documentations of the inputs they make, the costs, keep record of the costs it took you to develop such an intangible asset. Because it's important for your tax. That's how you reduce tax. Keep this record because it's also important for the big issue of ownership, especially in a digital and AI-driven economy. You need to keep record to know, to be able to trace ownership or to know, because something that is yours tomorrow, today might change tomorrow based on the actions or inactions of somebody. That's how volatile ownership now is in the IP space, especially where you are integrating other forms of knowledge, because in processes of doing that, you might just eventually end up having a co-owner of a particular IP asset without knowing it. And then you also need to start thinking of commercialization of your intangible assets, because that is also where the money is. You see, Apple, for instance, most of their income, you could say that 40% is brick and mortar, but you see 60% is based on intellectual property, intangible assets. And to do that, why they're able to get to that space is that they keep an IP framework and policy of how IPs are created, what is to be done, registration process, search process, recording process, cost of the IP research, R&D, and then commercialization options like licensing, franchising, and the rest of them. You need to evaluate any API or third-party contracts, employment clauses regarding IP ownership. This is critical because now you might you might think it doesn't concern you, but what we have seen from practice and experience is that your social media management team and your IT team, most times these two units are the loopholes through which IP infringement creeps into any organization. And so it's necessary that you also even conduct intellectual property training for your companies. You need to engage expert IP auditors and IP evaluators to document valuation certificate. Just not so long ago, there was a company we did an IP audit for, and it just happened that tax people came for him, and there was a problem. And what saved him was that there was that IP audit. After we'd done the IP audit, there was a certificate from the IP valuer that also showed what the worth of that IP was. So based on that evidence, he was able to really navigate through those issues. So this is a very good thing to do, and companies need to have budget for this. Data privacy budget, IP budget. You need to develop. Users of AI must register and ensure compliance with data protection. Begin to plan data localization now. I know most of us, almost 80% of the companies in Nigeria have a database shared or totally housed in a foreign country. But we need to start thinking of localizing this data. We need to adopt privacy by design before it becomes late and costly. You see, when you're at the process of forming something, that is when you engage the experts, really, not afterwards. Afterwards can be more costly because these guys will have to go back to remove certain things and start afresh. Afterwards could be that you have infringed already, and then you might have a complaint, and then the NDPC comes after you, or the NCC. You need to maintain records of AI system design, data sources, operational use and agreements, like I said before. You need to be part of the decision. And this is where I really want to also commend and thank the DG and the management of NECA. I think we've been very, very high on this part. For the part of the decisions we've been doing, we are being part of the committee membership. We are identifying, we are speaking. So all these are important. We need to continue doing that, becoming representative in most of those committees that are set up to review these laws. We need to also write template papers for them to understand from the business side how all these certain things that need to be let out really, and how they are increasing the cost of doing business in Nigeria. Then finally, we need to engage truly skilled DPCOs. Now, under industry best practice, sometimes you could have DPCOs that you've been using for years. They know all the areas, just like it said, old broom knows the corners. New broom sweeps well, but old brooms knows the corner. But in this stage, in this aspect, it's a big difference, because sometimes old broom also becomes, what's the word? For lack of a better word now, because they have been doing this over and over, and they then begin to become recalcitrant, or, and then the standard begins to drop. When this happens, sometimes there are two solutions to this. Sometimes you could change DPCOs. Sometimes there is no need to change DPCO. You could bring in a third eye to do some sort of of course, it increases your cost, but you could bring in a third eye because you understand how critical it is. And these are some of the industry best practices outside the country. In conclusion, we need to ask ourselves, do we have an internal IP framework and policy? What is our strategy for 2026? Have we developed one? Have you engaged the expert? Have you engaged a professional for your IP audit and valuation? Have you done the necessary things in terms of your DPCOs? Have you adopted privacy by design and complied with NDPA? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Okonkwo, for your insightful presentation as it relates to data privacy and employers' obligations. Thank you. So we are going to be moving on to the question and answer segment. So if you have any question, we are not going to be taking live questions because of time. So if you have any question, kindly put it in the chat box, and we'll get one of the speakers to respond to the question. So if you have any questions, please drop it in the chat box. We are not going to be taking live questions because we are planning to wrap up this on or before 2 p.m. So if you have any question, please drop it in the chat box. Thank you. I don't see any questions in the chat box yet. Does that mean that our speakers have done an excellently brilliant work today and you've understood everything that has been said? Yes, we're going to share the slides to the emails that was used in registration. So yes, you're going to get the slides. All right. Okay, in the absence of no questions, I would like to call the DG, Mr. Diwali Smatoyorinde, to formally conclude today's session by giving the closing remarks. DG Sayo, you have the floor.
You very much. I think that we still have over 200 of us on the call demonstrates the importance of this conversation. First, let me just thank the those that have spent their time to share the perspective with us. All the panelists, thank you very much. Dr. Muiwa, who is the chairman, NECA's Committee of Finance Expert, thank you for all you do. Victoria, who is the chairman of the NECA's Committee on Corporate Communication, thank you very much. Dr. Eno, and other contributors, thank you very much. We are not taking this conversation for granted. I think the last presentation also emphasized a bit of the things that we seriously think we should not lose sight of. Sometimes we think these things are they are just okay, but sometimes until those critical issue happens before we realize that things are not the way we thought they are. So the extensive presentation by Ifeanyi also shows that, look, a lot of things beyond just the theoretical, the business also have to do quite a lot to keep its doors safe from the issues that regulators might come with. So thank you very much, Ifeanyi, for that very incisive presentation. Dr. Eno, thank you very much. We'll still continue to call you. We still continue to leverage on you. Dr. Muiwa, once again, and Victoria, thank you very much. For member companies and all those that are not NECA member companies on the call, as has been emphasized, it's going to be very interesting in 2026. Regulatory issues will continue to dominate the conversation at the business level. Whether it's a trap or not, it is to be seen. But the best you can do is to ensure you close the gap within your space. And in your engagement with regulators, please be open enough to bounce any request, any letter from any regulator or from the National Assembly, any letter that you feel uncomfortable with, that or that you are not clear about, or that you're not sure about, feel free to share with us at the Secretariat, just to test whether the letter is justiciable or whether the agency have the right, the constitutional right, to carry out those regulatory activities that they are trying to carry out on your business. Feel free to reach us at any time. Can we share did we share the email address for the one we mentioned? Yeah. This is tax reforms helpdesk@neca.org.ng. If you have any question, any clarification as we continue to implement the tax reforms, if you have any question as regard the issues concerning NSITF, ITF, PENCOM, NESRIA, NAFDAC, any of those concerns, please feel free to share with us using this email. It's very important that you have the necessary information that will help your business to remain sustainable. We're not even talking about the realm of competitiveness now. You just have to be sustainable first before you start talking about the realm of competitiveness. So please leverage on the services that NECA is providing for its members. And members, those on the call that are not NECA member, please want to urge you. Sometimes it is safer to be safe. It is safer to be safe than to assume to assume that nothing will happen. In this environment, we have been here for a while to know that the level of unpredictability and inconsistency, even in policy implementation, can be so wide. So you can still send an email if you want to make inquiries concerning how to join NECA. Please send your email, send the message to that same email, And okay, thank you, colleagues. We have a flyer on the call. You can scan the barcode, or you can send your request to this email. So the different requests will be sorted out and passed to the relevant department for using this omnibus email that we have. Lastly, for me, I also want to especially invite you to one of our engagements, because we have engagement with many of these regulators so that they can also clear the air on critical issues that our members should look forward to. We'll be having a very important interactive forum with the Nigeria Social Insurance Trust Fund, NSITF. The first leg will be holding in Lagos on the 20th at NECA House to show how important this is. The second leg of it will be happening in Enugu for the South and Southeast on the 22nd at the Amaju Event Center in Enugu. The one in Lagos will be happening in NECA House, and the one for Abuja will be happening on the 27th, 9 a.m. Please join us so that you can get the relevant information. In fact, information is the currency now that can save a business or mar a business. So please join us on the 20th by 9 a.m. in NECA House, 22nd in Enugu, and then 27th in Abuja. All these programs are curated for you, basically, so that you continue to have relevant information. We're also working on interactive forum and engagement with the National Revenue Service and all these agencies, so that progressively we continue to bridge the knowledge gap from our members, so that unnecessary penalties are not slammed on all of us. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. I think Tommy have said we'll share the slide via the emails that we have you have shared with us. Once again, thank you for staying the course with us, and we hope that you follow our social media, Mr. Andrew, so that you get relevant information on all the programs that we have. So thank you once again. Tommy, over to you, man.
All right. Thank you, DG. Now we've come to the end of today's knowledge sharing session, and I'm sure we have a lot of things to take back home and work with. So thank you very much. Please follow our social media handles. Connect with us on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on X, formerly known as Twitter, on our YouTube page, and you can also check for more information on our website at www.neca.org.ng. Thank you very much for your participation. Have a nice day. Thank you.